All right, very warm welcome to all of you guys. Thank you so much for joining into today's session. So today we are going to learn about EC2. Right, in the previous few sessions we have heard about EC2 a lot, and in many places I mentioned that we will have a separate session where we will discuss EC2 in detail. Right, so what is EC2? Elastic Cloud Compute or Elastic Compute Cloud. So it's just a proprietary name which AWS gives it to its service, which helps us to create virtual machines, right? So the same service is available in other cloud platforms as well, like Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, etc. But here in AWS, that service is called as EC2. So if you see, this is the structure that we have been following. We have seen what is cloud computing, what is the traditional IT infrastructure, and how it compares with the current cloud computing infrastructure. Then we have also seen what are the key characteristics of cloud computing, like on demand, scalable, and pay as you go, right? And there are different types of cloud computing which we have seen as well. What is public cloud, what is private cloud, what is hybrid cloud? Today we're going to see what exactly is AWS EC2, right? So we will, once we understand what is EC2, then we will understand the cloud service models, that is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. First we need to understand what exactly is EC2, right? So that day we had seen, by using the feature in AWS called as EC2, you can create virtual machines. So what are virtual machines? As we have seen in the previous session, earlier, before we had cloud computing, we used to have physical servers which are very similar to our desktops or laptops. They function in the same way, but they are much more durable. They are built in a much more durable manner, and they are used to install certain operating system, and then their configuration is much more higher, superior, in order to host a lot of different types of applications. So that same function of the server, when you bring it in a virtual form, right, where you do not host the physical servers in your own control or in your own data center, but you are creating them in the AWS infrastructure, that is what is called as EC2, right? That is called as a virtual machine. When you're using these different terms like EC2, right, what does that mean? So the term used by AWS is always EC2, right? So I said that that is Elastic Compute Cloud. So this term called as EC2 or Elastic Cloud Compute, it is the same as a virtual machine, right? The same term, it means the same. And that also means you can say a server, right? So whenever we are saying a server in terms of cloud, almost every time the server we mean a virtual server, right? So a virtual server, a virtual machine, elastic cloud compute, or many times in AWS we will call that as an instance, right? So all these terms mean the same: virtual machine, right? What is that? A server which is running in the AWS cloud and we are accessing that. So how do you create that? So there are different types of servers. Majorly currently we will focus on Microsoft Windows based servers, because that is much more easier for us to understand, because it's a graphical representation, and it's something that we have all used, right? We all use Windows operating system. So to understand all the concepts, it will be much easier for us to follow up with that. Later on we will also see how the Linux servers work and how you can use that, right? At present we'll focus on Windows server. So we are going to see today what are the different aspects that go into creating a Windows servers and how can you use it, what are the different ways that you can use it. So I'm going to show, I'm going to take you to the AWS console. In the next session, once we understand this, later on we will understand what are the different functions of EC2 servers as well, right? What are the different services or features under Windows server, like DHCP server, DNS server, IIS web server, right? All these things we'll understand. So on the main screen, because I have recently used this EC2 service, you see on the main screen itself, I'm able to see that link which will take me to the EC2 service. But if you want to see the other services, just click on this dot, these 9 dots, and then you'll get this particular window where you can just click on this link which says all services. When you click on all services, it will show all the services, and click on view all services. It will show all the services which are under AWS. Okay, now in this page, if you see, all the services which are available under AWS are all categorized into different domains or categories, right? So for example, under compute, the first service itself is EC2. Then there are other compute based services like Lightsail, Lambda, Elastic Beanstalk, Match, and all that. Okay, same way there are different services. I'm sure many of you know about containers. These days, containers are used a lot along with Docker and Kubernetes and all. Same services or similar services are available on AWS as well. Then you have storage-based services, you have database services. So many services. All these you can see there are so many services related with machine learning, right? So we will be seeing all the core services. What are the major services that you require to create a full-fledged infrastructure which can host other applications, etc. We will see all those services. Okay, so at present today we are going to learn about EC2. So if you see the first service itself here says EC2, so I click on that and it takes me to this particular page where it shows elastic cloud, compute cloud, which is EC2, right? So Amazon elastic compute cloud. So it says create, manage and monitor virtual servers in the cloud. And it says it offers the broadest and deepest compute platform with over 600 instance types and a choice of the latest processors. So when it says it offers over 600 instance types, what does that mean? It means that let's say that whenever you are purchasing a laptop or you're purchasing a desktop or something like that, there are many different configurations, right? There are different combinations of configuration that are possible. For example, you can purchase a 2-core CPU along with 4 GB of RAM and 500 GB of hard disk, right? Or you can purchase a 4-core CPU along with 16 GB of RAM and 4 TB of hard disk drive, right? So there are many different combinations of configurations that you can purchase. So this is what it says, 600 instance types. That means there are many different combinations of instance types that are available, that you can choose from based on your requirement. Okay, now how do you arrive at that conclusion and on what is your requirement and which instance type to choose? That we'll understand in some time. Okay, so let's say that you want to now select a server, you want to create a server. All you have to do is just click on this button which says launch a virtual server, get started. Okay, so I click on this orange button that says launch instance, so I click on that and this is the page that comes up. Now if you see, from top to bottom you have a certain list of things that you need to fill up in order to create a server. Okay, so if I scroll to the top or very top, you'll see more or less this is like a form that you need to fill up, and once you're done with all the specific configurations that you require, then you just click on launch instance, and based on what all details you have filled in, the system will create a server for you. Okay, so let's see the process now. What all things are here for us to fill up? So it says launch an instance and says Amazon EC2 allows you to create virtual machines or instances that run on AWS cloud. Quickly get started following the simple steps. Okay, so first of all, you need to give a name to your server. So this is according to your requirement, so that for your reference you can understand which server you're running where. And that's why let's say that I'm just going to name this as a demo server for now. Of course, when you have multiple servers running in your environment, you need to give them a certain name such that you can understand based on which application it is or based on which department it belongs to. You can have a certain nomenclature of the name, mentioning the department name, mentioning whatever application is hosted, something like that. Okay, so here I'm just naming it as demo server. Now I come down. Now it says here, for our server we need to choose the specific application and operating system images. Okay, now we all know what is an operating system, right? That day also we had seen. So an operating system is the application or the software which helps you to communicate with the hardware of the server or the computer system or the laptop that you are using, right? So on the laptop or desktop that you use, you have a particular operating system. For example, the system that I am using currently, if I go into the search window here and I type WinVer, right, it will show the Windows operating system version that I'm using, and you see here it says that it is a Windows 11 version, version 24H2, right? So Windows 11, that's what I'm using right now. Same way, now, for my home computer, I may have a type of Windows operating system, but for my servers, I have another set of types of Windows Server operating system available, right? And that server operating system has a lot more features and um, roles that are required for a server. So here for us, we will select a server based operating system, and that's what it gives here. And in AWS specifically, this server operating system that we are going to choose is also called as an Amazon machine image. Okay, so of course, AWS wants all the features that it provides to be named as its own proprietary naming convention. That's why they call this operating system as an Amazon machine image. Of course, it's just a regular operating system with okay, so here it gives us all these different types of operating systems. You can click on this, browse more AMIs. AMI means Amazon machine image, and you can select a lot more type as well. But here we already have what we need. So here we have Mac OS, Ubuntu, we have Amazon Linux, we have Windows. Amazon Linux is a type of Linux operating system which is configured in such a way that it is highly compatible with the AWS environment and it runs flawlessly. And we will use that later on. So let's say that in this case, we are going to choose Windows as our operating system. Okay, so let's say that I select Windows here. So as soon as I select Windows, it will give me all the different editions of Windows that are available. Okay, so if you see here, right from Windows Server 2016, you have Windows Server 2019, you have Windows Server 2022, and you have Windows Server 2025. And along with the different editions, it also has the different types of versions. Right, and certain editions have SQL Server along with that, right? So all these options are available. So based on your requirement, you can choose whichever edition of Windows Server that you want, right? And why do you have all the previous editions as well? Let's say that you want to try certain application, you want to install and use certain application which is compatible only with previous editions of Windows. Maybe it's an older application or something like that. That's why they have given you all these different options. Now, what is exactly happening here when you're choosing a particular Windows operating system, right? So it's exactly the way you would purchase a new laptop or a desktop, right? Whenever you want to purchase a new laptop, what is the decision that you have to take first, right? You have to select the exact operating system that you require, right? Maybe you for a new laptop, you're selecting whether you should purchase a Mac or a Windows based laptop, right? So the operating system is a particular decision that you need to take first. Based on that, you can purchase the system. Same way here, first you have to select which operating system you want. Once you have done that, you'll see here, there are certain operating systems which are marked as free tier eligible. Okay, so what does this mean? Whenever you sign up for your AWS free tier account, you get a certain limit of free tier eligibility in many of the services, most of the services, right? So when it comes to EC2, the limit is that you can use that server for 750 hours in 1 month. Okay, so whenever you sign up for a new AWS account, free tier account, up to 12 months, you are eligible to use most of these services for free up to a certain limit, right? And that limit for EC2 servers is 750 hours per month. Now, if you calculate that, of course, there are certain limitations in terms of the configuration as well, which we will come to next. But you can use you can use EC2 for 750 hours for free. So does that mean that you can use it only for that limit and after that it's not possible? No, it's not like that. After that, they will charge you for the specific amount for that particular type of EC2 server that you're choosing. Okay, now when it comes to 750 hours, if you calculate, it will come up approximately to 30 days of continuous running, right? So let's say that 24 hours in a day, so 10 days it's 240 hours, and approximately in 30 days you'll have 750 hours, right? So if you create just one server of a certain configuration called as T2.micro, you will be able to run that continuously for a month without any charges. But let's say that you are using two servers or you're using three servers. So the total time that is allocated to you in your free tier account is 750 hours. So let's say that you are using three servers continuously, then you will be able to use all three of them for 250 hours each, right? So that comes up to a total of 750 hours in a month. So any usage after that, let's say you're continuously running 3 servers for 250 hours each, that means around 10 days. After that, whatever number of hours you're running those servers, it will be chargeable. Okay, now what will be the charge associated with that? That's what we are coming to next. So once we have selected this operating system, let's say I'm scrolling down. So what is the next option here? Okay, so it says instance type. Right here it says instance type. So what we selected right now was the operating system image. Now it is asking for the instance type. So if I select this drop down menu, you'll see that there are a lot of options here. Okay, so for some reason it's still loading something. Okay, so you see it hadn't loaded properly, guys. That's why I'm just refreshing that. So I'm selecting Windows here. Let's say I'm using Windows Server 2022 base. Okay, which is a very stable version. We haven't used 25 much yet. So next, once we have selected the operating system, I scroll down and you see here you have the instance type. Instance type means the configuration, the physical configuration of the server hardware that you want to use. All right. Now, if you remember, I told you whenever you want to purchase a laptop or a new desktop or something, what is the first decision you make? Which operating system do you want to go with, right? Is it a Mac or a Windows? Same way, after that decision, what is your decision? You want to finalize the configuration of the system that you want to purchase. Let's say that you, on your laptop, on your new laptop, you want to do some heavy duty video editing and a lot of 3D graphic animation and all that. In that case, you require a very hardcore system. So let's say something like in Windows, you're going for something like an i7 processor or an i9 processor with very high CPU count, and let's say you're going for 64 GB of RAM and a lot of graphics built in. Let's say 16 GB of graphics card, uh, 4 terabytes of NVMe hard disk drive, all that, right? So you choose a certain type of system configuration, right? Same way here also, when you're selecting a particular server, you have a drop down where you have all these different configurations which are available. So if you see in this one, you have T3 dot micro, which has two virtual CPUs, it has 1 GB of memory, and then it will have a certain amount of hard disk space you can select later. Okay, so it has two virtual CPU and 1 GB of memory, and then if you keep on going higher and higher, see this one T3.2x large, it has 8 virtual CPUs and 32 GB of memory, right? And it also gives you the specific cost associated with this server if you select that server configuration along with the operating system. So we had seen what is on demand pricing, right? So based on how long you are demanding for that server to be running, there will be a certain cost associated. So if you see in this place, it says on demand RHEL based pricing is 0.2368 US dollars per hour, right? And if you use on demand Ubuntu Pro base, it will be 0.1862. So similarly, it has certain cost for Linux, certain cost for Windows as well. So based on the operating system that you choose along with this configuration, this physical configuration of the server, there will be a certain cost associated. For example, right now we had chosen Windows operating system, right? So if you see here, it says on demand Windows based pricing is 0.2528 US dollars per hour. So if you choose this particular configuration, which is 4 virtual CPUs and 16 GB of RAM, you will be paying 0.2528 US dollars per hour that you are running the server. Okay, now again, if you see here, if you see, there are many different types of configurations available. There are even servers which have let's say, see something like 72 virtual CPUs and 192 GB of RAM. Okay, we are talking about RAM, not hard disk space, is 192 GB of RAM. So these are all, see, even 382 GB of RAM, 256 GB of RAM. So very high end configurations, but at the same time, these all have a certain cost associated with it. As soon as you start running this server, the cost will start they'll start billing you for the cost, right? But in all these servers, there is only one server which mentions as free tier eligible. As we had seen, wherever in AWS it mentions free tier eligible, there will be a certain limit up to which you can use this easily, right, without any charges. Of course, this has been given for you to learn AWS so that you can, go hands on and do certain experiments, and you can learn, right? So in this case, the free tier eligible server configuration is only one, called as t2.micro. Okay, and if you see, you can use it with along with any of these operating system for free. But the only catch is it has only one virtual CPU and 1 GB of RAM, which in my most of the practical tests in whatever types of different types of configurations and like whatever types of infrastructure creation I've used, it is more than sufficient for you to practice. Okay, it's not the fastest server here, but yes, it is more than enough for you to do all your practicals and understand how to work on certain things, right? But of course, if you want to uh, use it in a certain demo where you need more better performing configuration, of course you can choose any one of them. It's not that expensive, right? Even if you choose, let's say, some 8 GB of RAM and 2 CPU, the cost comes to, for Windows, it comes to hardly zero point 0.1 US dollars. So even if you use it for 10 hours, it will be around one US dollars that you'll be US dollar that you'll be spending for that server. It's not much. So you have to be wise in how you choose the configuration for your testing. Of course, in an enterprise environment where you will be working on certain environment created for your organization, the bill will be taken care of by the organization. So according to their requirement, you'll choose what type of hardware selection you want. Okay, but in this case, just remember that the only free tier eligible instance type is T2.micro, which has one virtual CPU and 1 GB of RAM, which is more than sufficient for all our demos. Okay. Now, so what have we done? We are creating a virtual machine where so far we have given the server a name. Okay, so I refresh the screen. That's why the name has gone out. So I'm re-entering that. So we give it a name. Then we select the operating system and the version of the operating system that we want. And then we come down, we select the instance type that we want. In this case, I've chosen t2.micro. There are many others. And then we come to something called as a key pair. Okay, so it says you can use a key pair to securely connect to your instance. Ensure that you have access to the selected key pair before you launch the instance. So what is a key pair? So just like the name suggests, it creates a pair. That means two different files of keys which will have a certain code in the form of text in the file, right? So whenever you're creating the key pair file, one file is kept on your server which is being created, and the other file is given to you. So you decrypt the file which has been given to you, and you get the password, and then you can connect with the server that you have, right? So when you try to connect with the server will check with both the keys whether it is matching or not. And if it is matching, of course it will match because you are the only one who has that file, right? So because you are the only one who has that file, it will match it, and then it will allow you to access that server. Okay, so it's very, very important that the key file that you receive, you keep it absolutely safe. Make sure that only the people who need to access that server, only you will share it with them, no one else. Okay, so you take care of that file. You use that file to access the server every time you need to select them. Okay, so now if you have a key pair file that you want to use, if you have that file already, you can use that. But at present, we'll create a new one. So I'm going to say create new key pair. All you have to do is just give it a name. So I'm going to give it demo key. I already have a key file with that name, so I can just give another name. Let's say something like um demo key 1. Okay, so now I say create key pair. So this file has been downloaded. All right, now I come down. Now in this section, guys, once the key pair is downloaded, I'll show you how to use that file when we are connecting to that server. Okay, now when I scroll down, this is one of the most important part of this particular demo, which is the network settings. So in AWS, the networking part is the most critical part, because through networking you are able to interconnect all the different resources that you have. Okay, so be it databases, different networks, or servers with the database, and different networks that you interconnect. So in the network section, we will learn in detail how to create your own network, which is completely isolated, and you can host all your resources there, and how you can interconnect that particular network with all the other networks. And in AWS, that particular network that you create to host your resources is called as a VPC. Okay, so VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. So when we were learning about the different types of cloud, we learned about a private cloud. Okay, so what is a private cloud? Which is specifically, it is meant to be used by only one organization, right? So that is what a private cloud is. In this case, even though you are creating that service in a public environment in AWS cloud, but you are creating it for yourself, for your organization, right? So virtually, it is creating a private cloud for you. So that's why it's called as a virtual private cloud, VPC. And we will see in detail how to create that VPC. But here, if you see, it is mentioning VPC. So it has already by default selected a network for us called as VPC, whichever is mentioned here. And we will see later how to create that. But at present, I'll show you how to select that. So I just type VPC here, and it gives me the section called as VPC. It says isolated cloud resources. So I open this in a new tab. So what happens is AWS by default gives you one VPC where you can host your resources. Okay, so this is created by default, and every uh, account will have this VPC. Okay, this default VPC will be there. So you, for our demo, we can create our resource on this VPC. But usually whenever we are creating our own resources, we will create our own VPC. So if you see on the top right here, there is an orange box which says create VPC. So we can create our own VPC as well. What is the advantage in that? You can select your own IP range, etc., which we'll see later. Okay, so at present, this default VPC, which is already given to us, if I scroll to the right, you'll see this is the VPC ID. That means every VPC has its own unique ID with which it can be identified as a unique network in AWS. Okay, so if I scroll to the right, you'll see something called as default VPC. Yes. Okay, so if this was a VPC which I had created, it will say default VPC. No, that means it is not a default VPC. It's something that I have created. So default VPC means a VPC which AWS has already given to us. Now I go to the previous tab. I come to the EC2 tab, and so here the VPC, default VPC, is already selected. So I'm not going to change that for now. Later on we'll learn about VPC. Okay, and then there is something called as a sub network, which is a sub part of that network. So we'll leave that as it is as well. Okay, now there is a very important section here called as auto assign public IP. When we are learning about the network, guys, we will also understand what is public IP and what is a private IP. I'll make sure that I explain to you that in detail, so we'll understand that. But what is public IP? If you remember in the previous section where we were learning about what is the cloud, I showed to you that I created a temporary server in the EC2. I created a website on the EC2 server. We hosted that there, and then I put in an IP for that server on the browser, and then we were able to access the website which we hosted in that server, right? So that IP address is what is called as a public IP address. So every system all over the world will have a particular IP address by which it is identified on the internet, and that is what is called as a public IP address. So it is asking us here, for this server, do you want to assign a public IP address or not? Okay, later on we'll understand what is public IP and private IP in detail. But here, because I want to access my server over the internet in some time, we will say yes, we do want a public IP for our server. That's why I have mentioned here auto assign public IP enable. When I say enable, when the server is being created, automatically AWS will assign a public IP to my server, and that means as soon as my server is created, it will automatically be connected to the internet. It will be accessible over the internet. That's what it means. Okay, so we will keep that as enable. Now we come to another section, which is again very important section called as firewall. Now understand one thing, guys, this public IP, this firewall, everything comes under the network settings itself, right? So all this we'll understand in detail in the network section. But what is a firewall? So firewall means which are the services that you want to be accessible on this server. Okay, so whenever you're talking about a server, guys, you need to understand that on a server you will be hosting certain applications, you'll be hosting certain website, etc., right? So those applications and websites which are exposed to the internet, which are accessible through the internet, are also vulnerable to be attacked by certain hackers or attackers, right? Because it is open to the internet, anybody can attack those websites. That's why, to ensure that only the relevant or required applications or services can be accessed on that website, you keep only those applications or certain ports open, so that only they can be accessed, none of the other ports can be attacked, right? Or they may be vulnerable. So every application or service is accessed over something called as a port, right? A port is just an opening so that the application can be accessed over the internet. So every service will have a certain port associated with. For example, there's a service called as DNS. So there is a port associated with it called as port number 53, right? Similarly, for HTTP, there is the port number is port number 80. So there is something called HTTPS, which is a secure internet connectivity. The port number associated with that is 443. So for all these kind of services, there is a predefined port number which helps you over the internet access that particular service or feature on that server. Okay, so we will ensure we are allowing only those features to be open to the internet. We will close everything else so that our servers will be safe. Okay, now it is asking us which all services do you want to keep open. Okay, so I will say allow RDP traffic, then I will say allow HTTPS, and then I will say allow HTTP as well. There are certain ways that you can open other ports as well, which we'll see in detail in the network section again, which is called as security groups. So security group is what allows you to open certain ports on these servers. Okay, so right now I'm allowing all three, and I'm sure you will understand what is RDP, right? So in the previous lecture, if you remember, we had seen how do you take access of a server. So you use something called as a remote desktop connection, or a remote desktop protocol, a small application through which you can connect to your remote server. So for that application to work, through which you can connect to that server, you need that RDP service to be running. That's why we are allowing that RDP port as well. Okay, so when you allow all these three, then you will be able to access your server and then access internet based applications on that server as well. Okay, now again, we will go through this security group in much more detail when we are learning the network module. Now I come down, and here it gives me a section where I can choose or select the type of hard disk drive that I want to install on my system. Okay, so first of all, it has already by default taken a hard disk whose size is 30 GB. So that is the minimum size of disk that you require for Windows to be installed and run efficiently. Okay, so if you see here, it also mentions free tier eligible customers can get up to 30 GB of your storage, right? If you take anything more than that, then there will be a certain charge associated with that. So that's why we will just leave it in that. So let's say that I need another disk. So many times we leave our operating system running in the root disk as we have here, and then for your data to be stored, you may have another disk associated, right? So if you need something like that, you can just click on this add new volume, and then you can say here what is the size of the disk that you want. So I can say something like 500 GB of this particular type of disk. Okay, again, I'll be charged for that particular 500 GB of disk for how long I use it. Based on that, there will be a certain charge. So I don't require that right now, so I'm just going to say remove, and I'm going to just keep that root disk, the C drive for any Windows. I'll keep that as 30 GB because we are just doing a demo system right now. Later on, whenever you're installing any applications or something based on your requirement, you can add additional disks as well. Okay, now one more important thing that you need to see here is, although the size of our disk is 30 GB, if you see here, there is a drop down which says GP2. Okay, so what is that? So if I select that drop down, there will be many different types of disks. Okay, so GP2 is nothing but something called as a general purpose SSD. General purpose SSD means it can be used for most of the tasks that you may run on your server. Okay, so most of the tasks, whatever type of applications you want to install or something like that, then you can use GP2, general purpose SSD 2. Okay, so GP2 is just the next updated version of GP1 which we had earlier. And if you see, after that, now we have another version coming in called as general purpose SSD GP3, which is again uh, a newer version. So of course, with the every new updated version of the general purpose SSD, you will have better features in terms of read write speeds, in terms of the performance of the disk, etc. But it is an SSD disk, so of course the performance will be very good for most of the general purposes. Okay, now you see there is another type of disk here which is called as a provisioned IOPS SSD, right? So IO1. So provisioned IOPS means provisioned input output per second, right? Provisioned input output per second. So that means it allows you to provision the number of inputs and outputs per second that you require. So most probably these kind of disks you can use where you want the performance of the disk to be very high, the read write speeds to be very high, or if you require a specific type of read write speed, a specific value of read write speed, you can select this disk, and then you can manually select what is the read write speed that you want. And of course, based on the read write speed that you select, the cost will increase or decrease. Okay, so let's say that I'm selecting IOPS SSDs. See here, I can select the specific IOPS that I want, right? So if I've selected here IO1, so it gives me IOPS, this is the IOPS. I can select whatever IOPS I want. I can increase it or decrease it. There's a minimum value that I can go. There's a certain maximum ratio and all that you can select. So if I select 30 GB over here, it cannot go more than 1000 ratio. So if I want to select anything more than 30,000 IOPS, I need to increase the disk space here. So let's say that I say 40 here. I can go up to something like 30,999 here. Okay, so this will be available. If I go above 40, it will not take it. See here. So it has to be in a 1:1000 ratio. So if I have 40 here, the maximum I can do here is around 40,000. Okay, so again, IOPS means input output per second. So based on the input output per second, the read write speed that you require for your disk. So let's say you have a database where you have a lot of critical data, and that you have a certain critical application which reads and writes on the disk very frequently. So based on your requirement, you can set a certain number of IOPS. So if you need a very high number of IOPS, you need to make sure that the disk size is also more. So let's say something like I need 60,000 IOPS, right? Then I need 60 GB of disk here so that it can mix and match. So that's the importance of IOPS, guys. But at present, I'm not going to take all that. I'm just going to select GP2 as the default was, and I'm going to keep this as 30. I'm going to keep it as a simple version, right? So we're going to take 30 disk and GP2. Again, you can add other disks also based on whatever variety you want. And there's another version called as magnetic standard disk, guys. Again, these are the old type of disks which are very slow in terms of read and write. The cost may be very less to use that, but it's just definitely not recommended to use something like that, because the already your processor and RAM and everything is very less, so you'll have a very poor performance in terms of your server that you're creating. Okay, so just let it run on GP2. Okay, so that's the disk, the root disk that we are creating for our server, and after that it's done. So there is something called as advanced details at the bottom, which we'll see later on, guys. Once we have understood a lot about EC2 servers, we've understood the different aspects of cloud networks and everything, then I'll show you a lot of things about in the advanced details as well. So at present, to create an EC2 server in detail, what all have we understood? When you come to the page where you're going to create an EC2 server, what all do you put in? You, to launch an instance, you put in a name first. Then you select the operating system that you want, whether you want a Mac or a Linux or Windows, whatever. Here we have selected Windows, and then you select the specific edition of Windows that you want, whether you want a 2022 or 25 or 2019, something like that. Then you select the instance type, the configuration of the server that you want, 8 GB RAM, 16 GB RAM, something like that. Then here we have selected T2.micro, which is free tier eligible. So we have selected one virtual CPU and 1 GB of RAM. Then we come down, we create a key pair. key pair is the file that is downloaded to your system. One file is kept on the server. Based on the match, you use that file as a password to connect to the server. Then we come to the network settings, which we'll see in detail later on. But here we select the default VPC which AWS has created for us. Then we have a subnet as well, which is created for us. Then we assign a public IP to that server so that we can connect to it over the internet. Then we allow certain port numbers based on which services we want to be accessed on that server, so that we can keep our server safe, so that unnecessary ports are not open. Then we select the type of disk and the size of disk. Here we have only selected one root disk C drive for our Windows server. That's it. Okay, now on the right hand side, if you see guys, if there is something called as number of instances. If I select 1 here, it will create only one server for me. If I select 10 here, it can create at an instance, at an instant, it can create even 10 servers for me of the same configuration that we have selected here. Okay, that's the power of cloud, guys. If you had to create 10 servers earlier physically, it would take so much time for you, right? You need to put every single server on the rack. You have to connect all the power cables and everything. Then you have to log into each server one by one. Then you have to configure Windows on that, and then you have to get the server up and running. But in this case, you just select the configuration on the cloud, and then you select the number of instances you want. Even if you want 50 servers, you just mention 50 there, and it will create 50 servers for you within the next 3 to 4 minutes. That's the power of the cloud, guys. That's the reason cloud is so important and it's booming, and that is the future in IT infrastructure, and it is here to stay, right? So I'm just going to mention one here, and I'm going to say a number of instances as one, and then I'm going to click on this orange button that says launch instance, and I click on launch instance here. Okay, so it is all the configurations that we have put in has been successfully accepted. If there is something mismatch or something like that, if certain instance is not possible to be created, it will give you an error. Here it has said successfully initiated the launch. Okay, so it has only initiated the launch. Now we go to this link which says instances, and we'll check the status of our server. So here it says instance is now running, but as we had checked that day also, it says status check initializing. When your server is initializing, it means that in the backend it is running a lot of different types of checks. So when it is running all those checks, guys, um, I'll show you what checks it is running. So if I come on at the bottom, there are a lot of tabs here. You see it gives me details about the server, status and alarms, monitoring, security, networking, storage. All these things are mentioned here. So in details, if you see, it has already assigned a public IP address to it, right? When we were when we were filling up the uh, details for creation of that server, we had that option auto assign public IP enabled or disabled. So we had selected enabled there, and that's the reason while the server is being created, it's not even up yet, it's still coming up, but already the public IP has been assigned to it, right? And there is something called as a private IP also, which we'll understand in detail later on. So these are all the different details about that server. And under the networking part, see here, this is the VPC that we had discussed about. So in this tab, if you check, guys, the system status check shows us initializing, and the instance check shows us initializing as well. So these are the two checks that is under the status check. Okay, so when I refresh this now, if the server is already back up, it will say that 2 out of 2 checks passed, right? So these are the two checks which it is doing: system status checks and instance status checks. So let's see, if I refresh this, it's now saying 2 out of 2 checks passed, right? And so instance checks are done, system checks done. So it checks all the different things like hardware has been installed properly in terms of the RAM, CPU, disk, and whether the operating system is loading properly. Once it does all those checks, then it gives us the 2 out of 2 checks passed, and then you can access the server. So right now I'm going to click on connect here, and I'm going to select under the connect to instance option, I'm going to select this RDP client. When I select this RDP client, it gives me the option to download a remote desktop file, right? So this, when I click on this, it will download a file which is nothing fancy. It's just an RDP file wherein it has already mentioned the public IP of the server that we are going to connect to. So if you see on Windows itself, there is a built-in feature called as RDP, right? So if I select RDP, RDP is the remote desktop protocol, and that protocol is used by this feature called as remote desktop connection. Okay, so if I click on this remote desktop connection, it gives me this particular screen through which I can connect to any Windows server or system remotely. Okay, so I just have to put in the IP address of that particular system here, and it will connect to it. Okay, so all that the system does is, if I click on this download remote desktop file, it will it will create a file for me like this, and it will enter the IP address automatically. Okay, so I just click on this. So if you see, that file has been downloaded. If I click on this, the same window comes up, the same remote desktop connection window. Then I click on connect. So it connects here, and it is asking me for the password. So how will we get the password? So here you have the option to get the password. Okay, so I click on this get password, and it is telling me upload the private key. So the key file that we had downloaded to our system, that is our private key. Okay, so I click on upload, and I select the file and I upload it. So this is the file content. If I open the file in a notepad, this is exactly what I'll see. So this is the key that it exchanges with the server, and once the server knows that, okay, this is the file that I had given to the authorized administrator, then it will allow us to connect to it. Okay, so I upload this file, then I click on this orange button that says decrypt password. So when I decrypt the password, it gives me this password. Okay, so if you want to understand this in greater detail, you can just go and check any video on YouTube which talks about public and private key, right? How that works, the key pair file, how it works. You will be able to understand that. Okay, so I copy this. Now I enter that password here, and I just copy pasted that password, and I click on OK, and now I'm able to connect. So if you see, again, this is the remote desktop connection. It is asking me, do you really want to connect to the server? I'll say yes. Okay, now it is connecting me to the server that we had just created a while ago. This server has been created in the AWS data center, right? It has been created in the AWS data center. In their virtual infrastructure it is running. Now I'm able to access it. Okay, so I just so this entire window that you're seeing right now, it's the AWS server that we just created. So I'm just going to resize this, and this is the server that we have. Okay, so now this server will load, and we will go into the desktop screen, and then we will access that server, and we will work. Okay, so this is the server that we just created with the entire configuration that we had, and this is how you create Windows servers. Now we are going to use this in many more demos that we are going to do in the coming sessions. We'll do many things like load balancers, auto scaling group, or VPC peering. So lots and lots of things that we are going to do, and in all those demos also we'll be using the same EC2 concept. Okay, and some of the demos will be using Windows servers, because it is visually much more easier for you to understand what's happening. And then once you have a very good solid foundational understanding of what we are doing, then we will move on to Linux servers as well in further demos.